The winter of that year was of a peculiarly biting character. The air over London chilled through to the bone, and yet within the rooms of our modest lodgings at Baker Street, the fire burned brightly, casting golden shadows upon the carpet and book-laden shelves. It was in those quarters, so familiar to me, that I once again found myself in the company of my friend and comrade, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the consulting detective, whose deductions often astounded me beyond measure. Holmes reclined languidly upon his armchair, his thin fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes half closed as though lost to the world. Yet I well knew such posture signified an active engagement of his remarkable mind. I, for my part, endeavored to apply myself to the pages of a medical journal, though truth be told, my eyes wandered more to my companion than to the print before me, for I had long determined to learn more of his extraordinary art, that science of deduction which he so modestly declared to be elementary. It was upon such an afternoon, when the bustle of London outside was muffled by frost, that I sought once more to elicit from him instruction. Holmes, said I, laying aside my journal, you must allow me to confess that though I have observed your methods these many years, I remain baffled at times how you arrive at your astonishing conclusions. I can perceive facts, yet I struggle to bind them with the invisible thread of logic as you do.
My dear Watson, Holmes replied, his eyes opening with sudden keenness, your faculties are excellent, but your habit is to see without observing, to hear without truly listening. You perceive the surface, I look beneath. The world is full of obvious things which nobody ever observes. That, in essence, is the foundation of my art.
Then teach me further, I urged, for I would give much to follow the steps of your reasoning, rather than be forever astonished by its result.
Holmes smiled faintly, rising from his chair to pace before the fire. Very well, Watson. Let us take an example close at hand. Consider our landlady, Mrs. Hudson. Without seeing her this moment, I can tell you she has been engaged in correspondence today, and not of a cheerful nature. What do you make of that?
Should say, I ventured after some thought, that you speak from assumption rather than fact. I cannot see the proof.
On the contrary, said he, the evidence lies in the faint scent of sealing wax lingering in the passage, unmistakably of a kind Mrs. Hudson keeps in her escritoire. Moreover, the ashes upon her apron when she brought in our tea showed fragments of burnt paper. The woman is of a nervous disposition. Therefore, I conclude that she burned a letter which troubled her. That is not assumption, Watson. It is deduction.
I shook my head in admiration, confessing once more that his perception bordered upon the supernatural. Yet before Holmes could expand further upon the lesson, a sharp rap sounded at our door, echoing through the chambers. A visitor, Holmes, I remarked, though such was unnecessary, for he had already glanced at the clock upon the mantel and adjusted his stance with the readiness of one who expected company.
Indeed, Watson, said he, the hour is that of Lady Eva Brackwell, if I am not mistaken. I received her note this morning, and its tenor betrayed great urgency.
Lady Eva Brackwell, I repeated, astonished. The name is not unknown to society columns. She is soon to be married to Lord Doverton, if I recall correctly.
You recall perfectly, said Holmes with dry amusement. She comes not in pursuit of gossip, but of salvation. Admit her, Watson.
I opened the door and was met by the figure of a young lady cloaked in sable, her features pale, her eyes bright, with an agitation that betrayed deep distress. She stepped lightly into the room, removing her veil with trembling hands.
Hmm, Mister. I guess. Holmes, she cried, her voice charged with emotion. I come to you in desperation, for I am undone if you cannot aid me. You alone stand between me and ruin.
Holmes inclined his head with grave courtesy, motioning her to a chair. Compose yourself, Lady Eva. You are safe here. Pray relate your difficulty with as much precision as you can command.
She clasped her hands tightly, gathering courage. It is a matter of letters, sir. Foolish, girlish letters written years ago to a man I thought I loved. They are indiscreet, and though I had long forgotten them, they have come now into the possession of a villain, Charles Augustus Milverton.
At that name, Holmes's eyes grew dark, his expression one of profound aversion.
Milverton, said Holmes slowly. "The worst man in London." "Tell me, Lady Eva, has he named his price?"
He demands £7,000, she whispered. Or else he will send those letters to Lord Doverton and to the press. My honor, my marriage, my very life will be blasted if that occurs.
The poor lady's anguish was so genuine that I felt my heart stirred with sympathy. I glanced at Holmes, wondering what remedy he could propose against so base and dangerous a foe.
"Lady Eva," said Holmes, his voice cold as steel, "you are right to come to me. Milverton is not merely a blackmailer, he is a serpent who fattens upon the misery of the noble and the innocent. He has made a career of extortion, and his venom has destroyed more than one proud household. The law cannot touch him, for his methods are cunning, and his threats too well founded. Yet I, Sherlock Holmes, have sworn to bring him low, and with your case I perceive the chance."
Lady Eva pressed her handkerchief to her lips, her eyes glistening with desperate hope.
You give me comfort, Mr. Holmes, yet I tremble still. He has named tomorrow evening as the limit for my decision.
"Fear nothing," Holmes assured her. "You don't know, Claire. Watson and I shall confront Milverton this very night, and I shall make it my business to rid London of this pestilence. Leave it with me, Lady Eva. Not a whisper of scandal shall touch your name if I can prevent it."
With that promise, she rose, visibly steadied by the force of his words, and after expressing gratitude, departed. When the door had closed behind her, I turned eagerly to Holmes. "Holmes," I exclaimed, "you spoke of Milverton with such vehemence as I have rarely seen in you. Do you know him well?"
Holmes's face hardened. "Know him! I know him as one knows a cobra. Charles Augustus Milverton is the king of all blackmailers. He collects secrets as a miser hoards gold, and he extorts his victims without mercy. He has driven men to suicide, broken engagements, and ruined women beyond repair, all while maintaining the outward semblance of a respectable gentleman of Hampstead. He is the most dangerous man in London, Watson, because his weapon is not the dagger or pistol, but the fear of disgrace."
I confess, a shudder passed through me at this description. "And what then shall be our course?"
"Our course," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming, "is to beard the lion in his den. Tonight, you and I shall pay a visit to Charles Augustus Milverton at his residence in Hampstead. We shall test whether his cunning is equal to my resolve. And you, Watson, will see deduction employed not upon harmless puzzles, but against a true master of villainy."
Thus it was that our quiet afternoon turned suddenly into the prelude of a grim adventure. I could not then foresee the perilous path upon which we embarked, nor the strange justice that would later unfold. But I knew, as I looked upon my friend's resolute countenance, that Sherlock Holmes had found an adversary worthy of his steel, and that I, John Watson, would not leave his side come what may. The evening was raw, a veil of mist hanging low upon the gaslit streets as Holmes and I took our way northwards by cab, bound for the heights of Hampstead. The horses' hoofs clattered upon the paving stones, and the lamps glowed like smudged halos through the fog. Within the carriage, my companion was unusually silent, his lean form bent slightly forward, his chin sunk upon his chest, his eyes gleaming with that cold fire which bespoke a mind absorbed in resolve. For myself, I confess my spirits were divided, half eager for the adventure, and sickening, half uneasy at the notion of facing one whose reputation was so sinister. More than once I ventured a remark, but Holmes answered only in monosyllables, as though loath to expend thought on anything but the adversary awaiting us. At last, the cab drew up before a house that stood somewhat apart from its neighbors, a substantial villa of brick, its windows glowing warmly against the dark. The garden was neat, the path gravelled, and yet to my eyes the place seemed as forbidding as a fortress.
Holmes alighted first, gazing keenly at the facade. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "Oh, Milverton's dwelling proclaims respectability, neatness, order, prosperity. It is the mask behind which He conceals his trade in shame and ruin. Therein lies his power. Society takes him at his appearance, while beneath lurks the serpent.
I nodded gravely, for indeed, the contrast between the bright lit windows and the dark purpose within them struck me forcibly. We were admitted by a servant, who led us without delay to a room of some elegance. There, before a cheerful fire, sat Charles Augustus Milverton. He was a stout man of middle years, with a round face, smooth shaven, and of an unctuous pallor. His small eyes twinkled with cold calculation, and his lips were curved in a smile of professional amiability. His hands, white and plump, toyed with a bundle of papers upon the table beside him.
Mr. Holmes, he exclaimed, rising with a bow of exaggerated courtesy. And Doctor, Watson, if I mistake not, I am honoured. Pray be seated. I trust your drive was not unpleasant.
Holmes regarded him with an expression of icy disdain. Dispense with pleasantries, Milverton. We come upon business which you know well. It concerns Lady Eva Brackwell.
Ah, Lady Eva, said Milverton smoothly, resuming his seat. A charming young woman, to be sure, a future peeress of the realm. But alas, indiscretion is a costly folly. She is fortunate indeed to have your good offices in this matter, Mr. Holmes.
You will not find me pliant to your extortion, said Holmes sharply. You hold certain letters which she wrote in her youth. You propose to blast her future happiness unless you receive a sum of money. That is blackmail, sir, and it is despicable.
Milverton chuckled softly, spreading his hands. My dear Holmes, you use harsh terms. I deal in opportunities. I am, if you will, a merchant of information. The lady wrote those letters. She sent them freely. They are her property no longer. I acquired them legitimately. Now, I offer her the chance to regain them at a modest fee. £7,000 is not unreasonable for peace of mind and preservation of honour.
At these words, I felt my blood boil. You villain! I burst out, unable to restrain myself. You prey upon weakness and innocence, and you dare cloak it as commerce.
He turned his little eyes upon me, still smiling. My dear doctor, you are impetuous. But passion has no place in business. I merely conduct transactions which others lack the courage to undertake. Society condemns me, yet pays me. Am I not, then, indispensable?
Holmes stepped forward, his tall figure looming. Mark me well, Milverton. I will not permit you to wreck this young lady's life. Release the letters and name your price within reason. Or else—
Milverton's smile widened, though his eyes hardened. Or else, Mr. Holmes? You cannot threaten me with the law. I keep within its bounds. You cannot appeal to my conscience. I have none. Heighten me with your reputation. I too am well protected. No, sir. The letters remain with me until my terms are met. £7,000 by tomorrow evening, or Lady Eva's past becomes tomorrow's scandal.
Holmes's hands clenched at his sides. For an instant I thought he might strike the man then and there, so great was his loathing. But with a visible effort, he mastered himself, though the cords of his jaw stood out like whipcord.
You dare to boast of ruining women for profit? He said in a voice low yet trembling with suppress. Deep fury. Take heed, Milverton. The day was come when your victims find redress, perhaps not by law, but by justice.
Milverton shrugged lightly, leaning back in his chair. Justice is a word for sentimentalists. I am practical. If Lady Eva values her happiness, she must pay. That is all. Good evening, gentlemen. I have another client awaiting me shortly.
He rose, his smile never faltering, and with a gesture towards the door signified that our audience was at an end. As we quitted the room, I heard Holmes draw a sharp breath, sitting as though restraining words which burned upon his tongue. The cold night air struck us as we emerged once more into the misty garden, and we walked some distance in silence before he spoke.
Watson, said he at last, his voice grim, that man is the most repellent of all criminals. For he sins without violence, yet destroys without pity. He is a leech that fattens upon fear. Were I to strike him dead this instant, I believe the world would thank me for it.
I was startled by the intensity of his words, for Holmes was seldom one to speak of violence, still less to condone it. Surely, Holmes, I said, the law must one day overtake him.
The law? Holmes gave a bitter laugh. The law is impotent against such as Milverton. He commits no crime that can be proved. He possesses documents freely written. He but demands payment for their suppression. Where is the statute to condemn him? No, Watson, If ever justice is done upon Milverton, it will not be through the courts.
We walked on, the fog wreathing about us, our footsteps muffled upon the pavement. At length Holmes's stride quickened, and he turned to me with that gleam in his eye which heralded some daring resolution.
Watson, he said, we must recover those letters at all hazards. At all hazards. Lady Eva shall not be Milverton's prey. If he will not yield them, then we must take them.
Take them? I echoed. Holmes, you mean?
I mean, said he firmly, that we must enter Milverton's house, search his study, and seize every document of his nefarious trade. Only thus can we free Lady Eva, and perhaps others, from his clutches. It is outside the law, yes, but within the higher law of justice.
His words thrilled and alarmed me alike. For to burglarize a man's house, however wicked that man might be, was a step I had never dreamed to see Sherlock Holmes propose. Yet as I gazed into his set features, I knew he was resolved, and that where he led, I would follow. Thus it was that our visit to Hampstead ended not in negotiation, but in the grim determination to take justice into our own hands. I felt the weight of the enterprise upon my conscience, yet also the fire of loyalty to Holmes and compassion for the lady whose fate hung in the balance. The night had shown me the true nature of Charles Augustus Milverton, and I understood why my friend named him the most dangerous man in London. The days that followed our interview with Milverton were charged with attention not to be dispersed. Damn ordinary diversions. Holmes and I retired to Baker Street with little more than the determination which had sprung in him and the sea wag to which I could attach my loyalty. He set about preparations with that methodical thoroughness which in him was never interrupted by pleasing. He made a small list upon a scrap of paper and then, with a quick, nervous pen stroke, crossed and recrossed the items as though by crossing them he might cross the obstacles which lay between us and Milverton's study. You will need a ladder, Watson, he said at one point, as though lecturing a novice in a clinic, a coil of cord, a crowbar, a dark lantern which throws no broad beam, and 2 pairs of stout gloves. We shall require also woolen caps and cloth to wrap our shoulders so as to slip through lattice work with less noise. I had always known Holmes to possess many strange contrivances, but never had I seen him liken himself to a general poring over plans of siege. There was a curious gleam in his eyes as he spoke, an effect of grim delight that I could not fully reconcile to his usual cool judgment.
Watson, remember that stealth is an art quite like diagnosis, he observed. The smallest sound may betray a great enterprise. Every step must be measured. Every breath must be under command. When you climb the ladder, take the weight upon your arms, and when you lift the latch, listen as though your life hung upon the faintest click.
His voice, though low, carried the gravity of one instructing a man in peril. Holmes, I answered, I will follow your directions to the letter. If you require me to act as decoy or to hold a rope, name the role and I shall perform it without hesitation. First, which you mean?
He smiled with a melancholy humor. You are a model of courage, Watson, and yet we must play our parts with the coolest nerves. At midnight, the household will be at its most still. I shall ask you to remain upon the roof at the back while I explore the study. Keep yourself within earshot, but unseen. If a cry should rise, remember that your duty may rather be to cover a retreat than to rush a rescue.
The plan was set. At dusk we took our measures. We purchased a coil of cord from a supplier in a narrow street, rented a stout ladder from a builder, and procured 2 dark lanterns whose shutters could be closed to emit no more than a thread of light. Holmes's attention to detail extended even to the way in which our boots were to be wrapped so as to be muffled upon the gravel. All this may seem theatre to the uninitiated, yet I assure the reader that in truth it was a serious business, fraught with danger. When the hour came, Holmes and I set off on foot, passing through moonlit lanes where the fog lay in silver patches upon the hedgerows. Yo! And the world seemed as if it held its breath with us. We reached Milverton's garden wall in silence, and I watched with beating heart as Holmes placed the ladder against the stone and began to mount with the deliberation of a man who climbs into a military entrenchment. I, for my part, followed as he had instructed, feeling the ladder tremble beneath my weight and hearing the faint click of the rungs as we rose. At the top we were upon the roof. forest, where the wind breathed cooler and where the stars were ragged through the fog. Holmes cast his small dark lantern ahead, the narrow light glancing along the tiles. "Keep close to the eaves," he whispered, "and do not shift until I bid you." I obeyed, and the minutes lengthened as though time itself were being measured for us in small tense breaths.
"There is a skylight at the rear study," he said. Running his hand over the tiles with practiced fingers. "We shall force that and lower ourselves. Be ready with the cord. If we are observed by a watchman or a dog, your voice must be the one to warn."
I knelt and steadied the coil while he handled the crowbar. Tapin gave it a dull crack that seemed deafening in the hush, and then a faint scent of stale tobacco and lamp oil rose up to us. Capping! The window lay open a little, and with a cautious hand Holmes eased it further and ushered me through like a guide preceding a traveler into a cavern. Yes, we slid down into the study, and upon my knees I found myself within a dim room lined with books and papers. A morbid collection of documents and correspondence sat piled upon a table. Upon the mantelpiece a clock ticked with slow persistence, but the hands hesitated as though in sympathy with our suspended breath. There were many things to note in that instant. The pattern of dust upon the floor showing that but S. Eldom did a foot cross that mat, turned edge of a paper as though some hand had leafed it in haste, and, above all, the bundle of letters tied with a ribbon which lay upon the desk like a small crime. My fingers itched to examine them, but Holmes's quick grip arrested me. "Not yet, Watson," he whispered. "We must first secure the room. Search the drawers and the safe. If you find any others, bring them to me." I bent to his bidding, and with the light so shaded that it might have been the glow of a dying ember, I felt along the handles of the drawers, deep, noting the hues of their catches and the subtleness of their seams. Presently, I found a small iron safe which, with some difficulty, Holmes forced open. Within lay a number of letters, envelopes with many names, and among them a little packet marked with a lady's initials. My heart struck at the sight, for I knew that these were honeycombs of grief. "Bring them," he ordered softly, and I bore them across the floor to him. He laid them aside and then motioned me to peer about the room. It was at that moment, just as my hand rested upon a heavy chair back, that a sound rose from the corridor, the hushed tread of footsteps, which had the quality of purpose, and then the faint click of a latch being opened.
"Quick," he hissed in my ear. "Creep behind the curtains. Do not show your face."
We crouched like two shadows behind the heavy hangings, and from that place of concealment I saw him, Charles Augustus Milverton, enter with a woman whose cloak was of deep black. She moved with a quick, nervous grace, and her voice, though low, was urgent. I could hear him speak with his customary smoothness.
"Madam, you may rely upon discretion," he was saying in that oily tone which I had come to hate. "My dealings are my own, and I protect those who pay me well. If you will submit to my conditions, your reputation shall remain intact, and your foe shall know no more."
The woman answered with a voice that faltered, "You have my letters, Mr. Milverton, and legal threats will not avail me. I am a poor creature who has been misled. If you will return them, my life may be saved."
"You have been misled by passion," he returned. "Passion is a weakness. Give me a thumb and all may be arranged."
I could see Milverton's fingers fat, white, and deft opening the packet which he had taken from below his coat. He flicked the letters to and fro with a practiced hand as though testing the weight of metal coins. The woman sank upon a chair and covered her face with her hands as if in despair. At that instant, I felt Holmes stir beside me, and his breathing was close and deep.
"By heaven," he whispered with barely controlled force. "Watson, observe every movement. We may be required to act upon what we see."
The woman looked up presently, and there was a fierceness in her eyes which I did not expect. "Give them back," she cried, and there was a ring in her voice that chased the fatigue from her tones. "Give them to me, and I swear by all that is left to me that I will never trouble you again with word of reproach."
Milverton laughed, the little thin laugh of a man accustomed to the yielding of others. "My dear lady, you misunderstand. Documents such as these are not returned. They are retained until the price is paid. It is a simple law of trade."
It was then that the woman's fury acted as a match upon tinder. She sprang to her feet with a suddenness that brought me to the edge of my hiding. From beneath her cloak she produced a small, keen instrument, and before either of us could interfere, she drove it, oh God, she drove it deep into the breast of Charles Augustus Milverton. He reeled, his round face blanching, a great astonishment upon it, and for a breath the two of them looked each at the other in a silence more tremendous than any cry. I felt the world contract. Holmes, I shouted, for the instinct of a surgeon overcame the stealth of a thief. In that cry, I'd betrayed us both. The woman turned with the deliberation of the desperate, and for one instant our eyes met. It was not possible in that flash to ascertain her age or features clearly, for the lamplight was low and the curtain between us threw much into shadow. But I saw there the wild courage of a hunted thing.
Holmes moved quicker than I had ever seen him move. He sprang from behind the drapery and caught the woman by the wrist, with such force as to startle me. Yet she wrenched herself away with a swift agility that was like the motion of a small wild animal. By that time, Milverton had fallen backward upon a chair and his hands beat upon his breast in feeble surprise. He fell to the floor with a contained thud which seemed to fill the room with a hollow sound.
In that instant, the outer door burst open, and Sussex policemen poured in, roused perhaps by some watchman or the noise of our earlier entry. I cannot say how they were summoned, but they rushed with lanterns flaring and cries of alarm. The woman made for a window. Holmes sprang in her direction. By a desperate exertion, she shot through the panes and was gone into the night. I saw her silhouette for a moment against the moonlit fog as she dropped into the garden and fled as though the earth itself were on fire beneath her feet. There was a confusion of voices, and in the midst of it, Holmes stooped over the prostrate body of Milverton. The man's chest heaved in short, irregular breaths. Holmes's face was changed, haggard, yet set in the iron of a man who knows the limits of action. He turned to me with an expression I shall never forget.
Watson, he said, his voice hoarse, we must leave at once. We have what we came for, those letters. Take them and come.
I snatched up the packet I had set aside, for in the height of that turbulent moment, it seemed to me the most sacred duty to recover those intimacies and protect them from further mischief. Milverton lay where he had fallen, and though his breath still came faintly, his eyes were glazed with the light that foreshadows death. There was no time to waste in sentiment. Holmes seized my arm, and we stumbled like culprits through the study, out by the broken skylight into the chill night, and thence across the garden where the dew and mist had gathered like a shroud. Our retreat to the ladder was not without peril, for the shouting of constables and the general tumult had awakened neighbors and brought them out into the gardens. Yet the fog worked to our fortune, muffling shapes and blurring outlines, and we gained the roof in a manner which I attribute to both luck and Holmes's craft. We descended into the street and vanished upon the lane as two figures swallowed by the dark. That night I bore in my coat a packet which held the fate of several lives, and in my mind there flamed an image of the woman's flight and the dying stare upon Milverton's face. When at last we returned to Baker Street and closed our door behind us, I laid the documents upon the table and watched as Holmes methodically arranged them by name and date, his features hard with thought. He had made a peculiar, almost comical remark at our first minutes in that study. He had said that, to make an omelette, it was necessary to break eggs. Yet no jest now could have been more ill-suited to our feelings. Thus ended our incursion into the den of Charles Augustus Milverton. Blood had been shed. A desperate woman had escaped into the night, and we had in our possession the papers which, in truth, we had set out to secure. I confess that my mind was a tangle of professional curiosity and moral disquiet. I wondered whether the scales of justice had been balanced or merely tipped by an act of vengeance. Holmes, for his part, was as inscrutable as ever, though his hands trembled upon the letters as he passed them. There was to follow, I felt, a heavier matter than the burglary, a question of conscience, of law, and of what right we possessed to burn a secret which might be both weapon and wound. The dawn following our perilous expedition found Baker Street shrouded in a thick London fog, some of the gas lamps flickering weakly through the morning mist. Holmes sat in his familiar chair by the fire, the letters laid before him in neat stacks, while I poured tea into the cups with hands still unsteady from the night's adventure. Though the household seemed calm, I could feel the tremor of the city outside, as if London itself had sensed some disturbance in its usual order. Holmes, as ever, seemed absorbed in thought, his eyes not upon the flame but beyond it, thus, as though tracing some intricate pattern of consequence and motive. The letters before him were the spoils of a daring act that I could scarcely credit had occurred only hours earlier. Yet while he examined them, my mind wrestled with the events we had witnessed. The desperate woman, the flight through Milverton's garden, and the fatally struck figure lying helpless in his study. "Holmes," I said at last, breaking the silence, "I cannot help but feel a chill at what has transpired. The man lies dead, and we have in our hands the instruments of his craft. Are we to act as judge and executioner alike?"
Holmes glanced up, his sharp gaze meeting mine. Watson, you speak as a man of conscience, and rightly so. Yet Yet, consider the nature of Milverton. He was no ordinary criminal. He was a predator of human virtue, a scourge who took delight in the suffering of the innocent. The law cannot reach him. He was meticulous, cunning, protected by those who value appearances above justice. Our interference has prevented greater evil.
I nodded, though unease still weighed upon my spirits. I understand your point, Holmes. Yet there is a danger in taking justice into our own hands. What if our actions are discovered? What if we are accused of complicity?
We must exercise discretion, he replied, his tone deliberate. No evidence shall trace back to us. The woman has vanished. The letters are secured, and we shall be careful that our names remain untarnished. Sometimes, Watson, the law cannot protect the innocent, and then it falls to those with knowledge and resolve to act.
As he spoke, I observed the meticulous manner in which he sorted the letters, examining each envelope and cross-checking names, dates, and contents. His mind worked with the precision of a surgeon, separating the personal from the pernicious, distinguishing genuine grievances from trivial indiscretions, all in an effort to restore order where chaos had reigned. Our reverie was interrupted by a sharp knock upon the door. Holmes's hand went to his forehead in that habitual gesture of readiness. "Watson," he said quietly, "be prepared for company, but let no movement betray our previous activity." I opened the door to find Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, accompanied by two constables. The inspector's face was grave, his eyes flicking suspiciously about the room. "Gentlemen," he began, "I am afraid there has been a most unfortunate incident at the residence of Charles Augustus Milverton in Hampstead. The man is dead, murdered in his own study. We are investigating the circumstances, and I trust you have nothing to conceal?"
Holmes rose, folding his hands behind him with an air of measured calm. "Ah, Inspector Lestrade," he said, "we were not present at the time of the tragedy, and have only just heard the news ourselves. I assure you, you will find no evidence linking us to the events of last night. Pass!"
Lestrade's gaze lingered upon us, sharp and probing. "I see. And these letters?" he asked, noticing the papers upon the table.
Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Purely private correspondence, Inspector. None pertains to Milverton's business dealings, nor are they relevant to the investigation at hand."
Lestrade did not press further, though I could sense the cautious skepticism in his eyes. He took his leave with curt instructions to maintain readiness for any follow-up inquiries. The constables followed, leaving the room in a tense silence that seemed to echo the distant murmur of London's awakening. I set down my cup, feeling the weight of responsibility press upon me. "Holmes," I said, "we have interfered in forces beyond ordinary comprehension. Is it right that we should act with such autonomy? Go and beat him. The law, though slow, exists to guide society, yet we have chosen the path of vigilant intervention."
Holmes's eyes were fixed upon the letters. "Watson, I do not doubt the moral burden of our actions. Yet consider this. Milverton thrived upon fear, corruption, and secrecy. By removing the threat he posed, we have preserved innocence and curtailed evil. Ethics are rarely neat. They are the terrain of difficult decisions."
I sighed. Attempting to reconcile my professional scruples with the undeniable success of our endeavor and the woman who attacked him. Do you think she has escaped unscathed?
Holmes's expression darkened. "She is cunning, resourceful, and driven by desperation. I suspect she has vanished into the labyrinth of London's alleys, perhaps aided by allies or by sheer luck. Her actions, though extreme, were provoked by Milverton's relentless cruelty. Row! In a sense, she is a fellow instrument of justice, however unconventional."
The morning wore on, and the fog lifted slowly, revealing the familiar outlines of Baker Street. Holmes continued his examination of the letters, making meticulous notes and categorizing them with an almost clinical detachment. I observed him with a mixture of admiration and concern, for I understood that while the moral questions troubled me, for Holmes, the imperative of resolution outweighed hesitation. "Holmes," I ventured, "will we ever reveal the truth of these events? The letters, the confrontation, the death of Milverton, are these things to remain hidden forever?"
"Some truths," he said softly, "must remain concealed. The world is not yet ready for the full revelation of human frailty and villainy." disclosure would harm the innocent more than it would punish the guilty. Discretion is as much a tool of justice as action itself.
And so we sat. The room quiet save for the scratch of Holmes's pen and the occasional sigh of the fire. I could not help but reflect upon the strange calculus of justice we had enacted. A blackmailer felled, a desperate woman freed, letters secured, yet no law enforced. It was a resolution outside the ordinary parameters of society, yet I knew instinctively that in this instance the outcome was just. The afternoon deepened into evening, and as the lamps were lit to ward off the encroaching view, Holmes finally laid down his pen. She leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes glinting with that peculiar satisfaction which accompanies the completion of a difficult and morally intricate task.
Watson, he said quietly, we have acted in the shadows, and yet for the greater good. Remember this, the law is sometimes inadequate, and prudence demands that those with insight intervene. Milverton's tyranny is ended, his instruments of fear destroyed, and Lady Eva and others shall know safety once more. That is our measure of success.
I nodded, though I was not free from unease. The events of that night had left an indelible impression upon my conscience. Yet I could not deny the belief that our actions had brought to those we sought to protect. As I gazed upon Holmes, I realized that his conception of justice was singular, rigorous, and unflinching, often beyond the grasp of ordinary men, yet rooted in a profound understanding of human nature and consequence. Thus ended the immediate aftermath of our confrontation with Charles Augustus Milverton. Death, flight, secrecy, and moral reckoning had intertwined to produce an outcome that was at once satisfactory and unsettling. As night fell over Baker Street, I could not foresee the reverberations of these events through the lives we had touched, nor the reflection it would cast upon my own understanding of duty, loyalty, and the precarious balance between law and justice. Yet, for all my misgivings, one truth was undeniable. Sherlock Holmes had once again demonstrated that deduction, courage, and resolution could confront evil where the law failed. And for my part, I remained steadfastly by his side, ever ready to witness, to record, and to follow the enigmatic path that his extraordinary mind chose to tread. The days following our audacious expedition into Milverton's den passed in a strange quietude. London moved on as though unaware of the dark drama that had transpired, its streets full of the mundane concerns of commerce and social intrigue, while Baker Street became a haven for reflection and cautious triumph. Holmes, ever immersed in his extraordinary faculties, examined the letters and documents with an intensity that left no detail overlooked, and I sat near, recording and observing, struck once more by the peculiar rhythm of his mind. I recall one particular morning, and the room heavy with the scent of smoke from the fire and the faint tang of ink, when Holmes leaned back and addressed me with a serenity that contrasted sharply with the violence of our adventure.
Watson, he said, we have acted, as you know, in defiance of conventional law. Yet the outcome is clear. The innocent are safe, and Milverton's tyranny is ended. Justice, in its higher form, has been administered.
I studied him with a measure of awe and trepidation. Holmes, I cannot but admire the success of our efforts, yet the weight of responsibility presses heavily. We have interfered with life and death, and the consequences could have been far graver. Does the law offer no recourse for such matters?
Law, he said, tapping his fingers together with deliberate rhythm, awe is inadequate when confronted with cunning, malevolence, and the fear which governs human conduct. Milverton would have evaded every ordinary instrument of justice. We stepped into that vacuum, not with malice, but with necessity. Morality, Watson, is often the only guide when law fails.
Anke's drifted toward the pile of letters upon the table. Each bore the weight of private confidences, each a fragment of human emotion and vulnerability. These letters, Holmes, I asked softly, shall they remain in your keeping?
He looked at them with a discerning eye, almost as though each contained a whisper of its author's soul. Some, he said, must be destroyed. They are instruments of evil, and their mere existence perpetuates fear and shame. Others, less dangerous, I shall preserve for study. It is a balance between prudence and mercy. To burn all indiscriminately would be to destroy history, To preserve all would be to perpetuate torment.
As he spoke, I felt a mixture of relief and unease. Relief that the threat had been neutralized, unease that human life and secrecy could be so intimately entangled, manipulated, and sometimes extinguished by decisions made outside the law. Overnight, news of Milverton's death circulated through London society with the usual mixture of gossip and belief. A shadowy woman, untraced and enigmatic, was whispered to have been involved, and the police found themselves with little evidence to prosecute anyone. It seemed that, in truth, our presence had left only a faint trace, easily obscured by the fog of chance and fortune. One evening, as the lamps burned low in our sitting room, Holmes and I conversed about the ultimate fate of Lady Eva Brackwell. Bike! She had been spared the scandal that threatened her, her engagement remained secure, and the letters that could have ruined her life were now beyond the grasp of her tormentor.
The lady's position is now secure, Watson, he remarked. Yo! Though she shall never know the full extent of the peril from which she was delivered. It is not her concern. Our duty is complete, and our intervention silent. History often demands discretion. R.B. Sir.
I reflected on his words, considering the extraordinary moral compass which guided him to intervene, to act decisively yet invisibly, to weigh the consequences of life and death required a mind unlike any I had known. I could see why society often misunderstood him, why even the most observant officials failed to grasp the magnitude of his insights. Holmes, I said after a long pause, in all the cases we have encountered, never have I felt the weight of consequence so heavily upon us. To act outside the law, yet for justice, is a responsibility of immense gravity. How do you reconcile this with your usual reliance upon deduction and fact?
He turned his piercing gaze upon me, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. Watson, deduction is merely the mechanism by which we perceive reality. Morality and conscience are the compass which guide the application of that knowledge. One may know the path and yet hesitate to tread it. Wisdom lies in discerning which paths must be taken, regardless of the discomfort or peril involved.
His words struck me with profound force. I realized that in Milverton's case, we had been both detectives and arbiters, adjudicating a form of justice inaccessible to ordinary law. It was a lesson in the complexity of human ethics, one that I would carry with me through every subsequent adventure. Days later, the letters were destroyed, too, save for a few which Holmes retained for careful study of criminal patterns and human deceit. Chojars, in the act of burning them, the smoke curled upward, carrying away with it not only paper, but a palpable weight of fear and oppression that had lingered over London society. In the quiet of our sitting room, as the last fragment of flame consumed the final envelope, a sense of completion settled upon us both. Holmes, I said, I shall never again doubt the necessity of your interventions. Though perilous and morally complex, your actions have preserved innocence and prevented evil.
He inclined his head almost with humility. Watson, the world is filled with darkness that the law cannot always penetrate. We act, therefore, as the instruments of insight and sometimes of necessity as its executors. There is danger in hesitation as well as in action. Discernment is the key.
And so the matter of Charles Augustus Milverton came to its quiet conclusion. The city moved on, oblivious to the lives that had been spared, to the danger that had been neutralized, and to the moral balancing act performed in the shadow of her darkened study. Holmes returned to his familiar pursuits of observation, deduction, and consultation, while I continued to record and learn, ever mindful that the line between law and justice is often as thin and precarious as the edge of a blade. Reflecting upon the events, I understood the singular quality of Sherlock Holmes's genius, not merely the ability to deduce, observe, or to anticipate, but to act decisively, ethically, and with an unerring sense of justice where conventional mechanisms faltered. It is a truth I would carry with me through every subsequent case, and one that forever altered my understanding of crime, morality, and the intricate web of human actions. The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, as I have related it, is not a tale of routine detection nor of simple triumph over villainy. It is, rather, a story of courage, moral calculation, and the delicate exercise of judgment in a world where innocence is vulnerable, and the law, though steadfast, is not always sufficient. It is a reminder that, at times, one must act with discretion, decisiveness, and the courage to confront evil directly, guided by the light of conscience and the sharp clarity of reason. And as I write these words, the fire glows warmly in our Baker Street sitting room. Sherlock Holmes bent once more over a new puzzle, eyes alight with thought, and I, John Watson, recalling the tale, reflect upon the strange and perilous path we walked. It is a path defined not merely by deduction and intellect, but by the courage to intervene when the shadows of villainy threatened to overwhelm the innocent. In that, I found not only admiration for my friend, but also a profound lesson in the exercise of justice and the measure of human responsibility.
Watson, Holmes said softly, closing a book with deliberate care. Remember always, to observe is to understand. To understand is to act, and to act wisely is the highest exercise of reason. Every case is a test, and every conclusion a reflection upon the nature of humanity.
I nodded, feeling the weight of that wisdom settle upon me, and thus, with the case of Charles Augustus Milverton concluded, the lessons learned were as enduring as the fog that sometimes lay across London, mysterious, insistent, and, in their own way, illuminating.